This is the Emergency Communications Training Net. Good evening. My name is Jerry, and I'm located in Waxhaw, North Carolina. My call sign is WB4EMC. Okay, and I will be the net control operator for this net. The purpose of this net is to train on emergency communication procedures, communications equipment, communication modes, and the National Incident Management, which is known by NIMS. I spell phonetically November, India, Mike, Sierra. Okay, before we get started, any emergency communications, traffic, or announcements? If so, please call WB4EMC or Net Control. Okay, not hearing any emergency traffic or announcements. Again, we would like to thank all those who logged in this evening. The net roster on Echolink as follows. My station, WB4EMC. The net is please recognize KB4GKI Jimmy up in Wilkes County. Also, the net is please recognize KB4NET Bill down here in Waxhaw. And also, the net is please recognize KD9er Juliet Delta Delta Billy up in Goshen, Indiana. Also, the net is please recognize KM4MUC Daniel. And also, the net is please recognize KD8 Mike India Bravo Eddie. Okay, well, again, I want to thank those who checked in this evening. I know we're getting closer and closer to the Christmas holiday, so I was just wondering how many people would check in this evening, being on a nice Saturday evening here. Okay, let's get right into a very quick training, and then we'll go for a round of discussions or any questions that we may have. Okay, before we really start in training, I just want to let those who are listening by YouTube, we are streaming live on YouTube right now. But those who are listening on YouTube and not involved in emergency communications, but would like to be involved in emergency communications and want to know how to get involved in emergency communications, I want to just let everyone know that the ARRL does have a training course in emergency communications that will help you to get your feet wet and let you know what emergency communications is all about. So those who have never had any training in emergency communications, I recommend everyone to check that out. Okay, tonight we'll still be discussing out of the ICS 300 training manual, and I know I might be preaching to the choir here this evening. I know several of the net, counting myself, have gone through this. But one thing that when I took emergency, we actually took the ICS 300 that we went over is what we call the training P. I mean, P is in Papa, the letter P. Now, just for a minute, get a letter P sort of image in your head, because that's very important. And we're going to be starting off down there at the very bottom of the P. I'll call it the stem. That's the incident event. Okay, let's say if something happens, that's where it starts. And then they're going up the letter P. The next phase is notifications. And notifications is sent out that an incident has occurred, that People need to deploy to either the EOC or to where the deployment sites will be. And then you go into the initial response and assessment. Basically, the incident has to be assessed. Facts and data needs to be gathered. And then we move on up to the incident briefing using the ICS 201. Or maybe you might say the IAP, okay, the initial, okay. And then we go up to the main initial meeting. That's when the incident has been, notifications been sent out, the incident has been assessed, and all the facts is gathered. Then there is an initial meeting. This is the B4EMC. Okay, now after that, we move up to the development update and objectives meeting. Okay, the incident has been going on for a little bit, so there are going to be some updates, and depending on what type of updates has been gathered or come in, the objectives will be established and probably has been changed. I suppose there have been some objectives a little bit earlier, but right now the incident has just been underway, and then the next phase is the command and general staff meeting. Okay, that's when the general staff, everybody gets together. And remember, about a week or so ago, I went over the command structure and the general staff. So that's when all the staff members will get together. And then after that, we go into preparing for tactics meeting. Okay, basically, let's say if it's a hurricane. I started to say a wildfire, but we don't have as many wildfires around here. If we were over in California, that might be a little bit different. And guys, let's keep those people in our prayers. I know there has been some bad fires going on over there. But let's say there was a hurricane that happened to occur. Then we need to, what type of tactics, what do we need to do first? What is important? Okay. And then that moves into tactics meeting. And then from tactics meeting, we are preparing for the planning meeting. Basically, as y'all can see, what it's showing here is we're getting all the data together. We got the data together, then how are we going to deal with this data? How are we going to respond? And that builds up to preparing for the planning meeting. And then we go into the planning meeting, okay? That's when everybody gets together and the plans are made. And when the plans are made, then we move into the stage of the IAP preparation and approval. The IAP is Incident Action Plan. That comes after the planning meeting. Well, during the planning meeting, the IAP is being developed. And then once the IAP has been approved, then we move into the operations briefing. Basically, from the IAP, we are now briefing everyone what is going to be taking place. And then after the operations briefing, then we go into the executive planning and assessment progress. Well, the incident has been going on for a good while. Actually, when we get to this last one here, the executive planning and assessment progress, that has been one operation cycle, okay? So from this point, we move right back into the starting point, not at the STEM, but in the P section. Back to the development, update, and objectives meeting. Things could have changed over a period of time. This is WB4EMC. Okay, sorry about that, guys. I got timed out there. But anyway, this is the Operation P. Okay, you probably have heard this before, and I wish I could somehow or another on EchoLink put up a PowerPoint presentation where everyone can see this. I know it's very hard to explain it without the diagram, but if you're going to be deployed at an EOC or out in the field, everyone needs to be sort of familiar how the planning or how the IEP is developed, how the tactics are developed, how the plans are developed. And this, the Planning P, explains that. This is WB4EMC. Okay, that's briefly what I was wanting to discuss tonight. Again, the ICS 300 can get very technical, very in-depth. My goal is just to briefly introduce different sections out of the ICS 300, and eventually we'll touch base on the ICS 400. That way everybody be familiar with it. For those who have taken the ICS 100, 200, 700, and 800, I highly recommend, if you have the opportunity, to take the ICS 300 and the ICS 400. Why I recommend that? Well, eventually all EOC is going to be requiring everyone who operates in it or in the EOC to have at least the ICS 300. I know down here where I live in Union County, we didn't have to have the ICS 300. Now it is a requirement if we're going to be working in the EOC. Now out in the field, let's say if we're working in an evacuation center, as of right now, it's not required. But what I'm stressing is that if you have the basic 4, if you have the opportunity to take the ICS 300, 400, please do so. Okay, this is WB4EMC. That is the training I have for this evening. And we'll go down the net roster here for comments at this time. Up on the list here, we have KB4 GKI, Jimmy up in Wilkes County. I know I'm definitely been preaching to the choir up there. This is a man that has been deployed a few times. He's retired Army Mars State Director for North Carolina. He has a lot of experience under his belt. So the mic is yours, Jimmy. Go ahead with your comments.
Well, this is KB4GKI. Good evening to everybody on the net. Good to see this many folks on the net. And hopefully we'll continue to grow. One thing about the Planning P, I'll share a little story with you. When I took 300 and 400, the instructor told us, he said, guys, you would be surprised at the people that look at the Planning P right there on the page, and they dedicate pretty much a whole page in the book to nothing but the Planning P. And they can't even see the P on the page. They look at the blocks and never look outside of the boxes and see the actual P. So if you ever take the class, be sure to take notice and make sure you can see the P. That way when he starts talking about the Planning P, you can understand it. Let me let it beep. Also, in your command staff and other meetings, at least the command staff and the first one that Jerry talked about, when he started talking about the briefings and the meetings. One of the things that you will accomplish in that meeting is your objectives for that day. You know, it may not be but 3 or 4 objectives. But then you take that back to whatever group you're in charge of, if you are in charge of a group, and you would tell them about the objectives, and then you figure out what your objective is going to be for that day. So it's basically a management system, and basically that planning P is pretty much part of the heartbeat of the whole operation. K before GKI.
K before GKI. This is W before EMC. Well, that's absolutely right. Basically, what we've been talking about so far in the National Incident Management System is basically it's a management system. It's like learning how to manage those who've been in college